Hey, it's Chris. Did 2023. Now we're doing 2022. March! Some big projects. A little bit all over the place, though. A little bit all over the place. And again, that's what's fun, because not only do we get to see where the games are at, do you have all the games at this point, which you probably don't, but the ones you do have, how do you feel about them? Again, not trying to say crowdfunding good, bad, or, somewhere in the middle, but saying, how are you doing with it? How are you doing with it? Look in the mirror and ask yourself that. Let's go. So first up, Terraforming Mars. Not that one, though. That's the dice game. It's a different month. Expeditions, Ares Expeditions, the expansions. Truth be told, they got lost in the shuffle of 2023. They're sitting right down under here. Only played through one of them. Incorporated into the base game rather fluidly. But do I love them all? Do I like them all? Do I utilize them all? Was it worth it? I mean, Fricks Games, puts out, their promos as with the, usual Terraforming Mars style of things. And there are a fair number of completionists. And as you know on this channel, I am not one of those completionists. And I sort of regret backing it at this point, to be frank with you guys. Just because I haven't played it. I haven't really gotten enough chance to, give my full depth of thoughts on several of the other modes and, layers of mechanics. Not that I won't necessarily like them, but just from a sheer, sometimes I just want stuff simpler, because you add those things and it's fine. But it's sort of also the reason with like Planet Unknown, which is sitting back up there behind Dune, that I didn't back the expansion for that, because they're like, hey, the expansion adds 15 minutes to the game length. And I'm like, really? Really? Does it make it more fun? Like, I'm looking for more fun, right? And that's what I couldn't be told that it was going to do. And that's, I'm, not sure on this side of things. And I probably shouldn't have gotten all three, because realistically, as I always say on the channel, right? Like, you don't buy more to save more, right? Like, I bought all three, and if I utilize one, I just lost out on the other two. And I don't like that. Do you like that? I don't like that. I don't like that. I understand the reasoning behind people saying, well, if I go to a movie, or if I go shoot, 9 or 18 holes of golf, I was going to say rounds of golf, that would be holy. But I don't do it just for the sake of doing it, even if I could make back a quarter of that money, right? I don't like that feeling. And that's a strong, pervasive element throughout my channel, if you're new here. That is not what I endorse or like doing as a nutshell. And so I don't like being able to go in front of the camera and tell you that. It's embarrassing. It's humiliating. It's sort of emasculating, if you will. Like, I bought something and I'm not going to use it because I don't have a good reason, right? But that's kind of it. And it's just a sheer plethora of other stuff, goodness getting in the way. So it's not a bad reason that I haven't gotten to it. I'm just not ignoring it or saying it's bad, but I just haven't gotten to it. So I guess tell me in the comment section down below, what do you think? What should I do with it? Should I dig deeper back into it, or you guys can advise me differently from that sense? I'm okay with it either way. Let's go next, though. Let's go next to Jurassic World, the Legacy of Isla Nublar. Kind of hit a rocky start with their Dice Tower review right after it came out. Or actually, you know what? Right before it came out. Some of the pre-production copies that companies now send over from a crowdfunding side of things. They do it with retail all the time. We hear it with retail all the time, right? Like Dice Tower, Man vs. Meeple, Board Game Co. They get these copies months in advance sometimes at retail, but we're starting to see a little bit more on the crowdfunding side as well. And I think that's what that was with that. Man, side note there, like, I wish I could get some of those. That'd be like cool. Not too many of them though. Like, I just don't need it. Like, I am swamped as it is at times with some of this stuff, and I like talking about too much other stuff as well, like simultaneously, like not peer review wise, which is honestly why you guys watch my channel in the first place. It's like you guys like to see me rant and devolve in front of the camera and just go on to side tangents like this one. But every once in a while, I look at some of those games and I go, man, I'd really like one of those a little sooner than, the regular, so I can get a little bit of that early whatever. And that's purely, a YouTube content, grass is greener side of things, right? Like I'm looking at Roth right now on Chip Theory Games and their Manny Tremblay. Anyway, side tangent there. So, going back to this though, I don't know. Like I was not terribly impressed by the campaign. It just missed or did not encapsulate what I think of crowdfunding or what I think crowdfunding should be, right? A legacy game is hard enough on crowdfunding. This was a legacy game that basically emphasized deluxeified, miniature components. And not even good looking ones. Some of those dinosaurs were darn ugly. Or like half sculpts. Like, if you're going to make dinosaur miniatures, make them dinosaur miniatures, folks. Or otherwise, why don't you just do meeples? Like, I don't understand that. I didn't understand at the time. And the Dice Tower review was not very positive about it. But I've heard mixed opinions out in the general public consensus of how they feel about it as well, though. So that's the biggest take home, I think, from this point, more than anything else. More than, is this a good game or a bad game? But, I've said this numerous times about myself, right? Like, I like certain things. But just because I like them doesn't mean that you will like them. If I dislike it, there are plenty of you out there that will look me in the eye and say, I like it anyway. You're an idiot, Chris. And I go, yep, that story checks out. That's true. And, 7.2 on Board Game Geek right now. Weirdly enough, only 300 ratings, though. Again, one of those big dichotomies between people that I think should have gotten it and the actual number of people ranking and rating it. Which, again, like Board Game Geek, who cares, right? At the same time, like, I expect a certain percentage of these to end up there. And when that percentage doesn't, whatever that percentage is, I'm making that up on the top of my head, it's always a little bit confounding to me why that doesn't end up happening. So is it because people don't like it? Is it because it just didn't work out? Is it because whatever, right? Shortly before, after this video, I will have my review of Divinus coming out, which is, Lucky Duck's tile laying legacy game that was on GameFound. And legacy games are an interesting topic as a whole. And there we'll be diving into some very tangential, those elements in a nutshell. And so that's what I kind of have to wonder. Now, when I scroll over to the Board Game Geek too, there's a lot of playthroughs. There's not a lot of reviews, which again is kind of weird. But how do you review necessarily a legacy game without totally spoiling it? I mean, there's a couple, there's a smattering. So, I mean, it's not like I'm saying there's none. Now, with Funko Games, weren't they bought out now, if I'm remembering correctly? Or acquired, or whatever happened to them? They're no longer necessarily, distinct. Are we going to see stuff like this again? Like, I think it's a great test of the market, but I think you really have to shoot for gameplay first. It's why we've never not seen a very successful Harry Potter game as well. Night Models, the first time around, their miniature game was not good. They're bringing it back around. But when you see stuff like this, it almost looks like more like utilizing the IP, but not necessarily being as concerned about putting out, a heavy niche board game complexity game from that aspect of things. And I think when a lot of us see these IPs that we're familiar with, we always want that heavy gameplay element. And the truth is that, it's not always going to be there. And sometimes you may have to make your peace with that it might not be for you. It may be for people getting into, or it may be to entice people that aren't as into in the first place. And I think sometimes we gatekeep and have trouble with that premise as a whole. And so I'm trying to be better about that myself as well. I have no clue, though, gameplay wise, it was very like roll and move-esque. And so I read the Jurassic Park book when I was a kid, before I saw the movie. And I will not let my kids make that mistake. The book is actually pretty freaking gruesome. Like, I shouldn't have read it as a kid. But anyway, so what I'm saying and where I'm going with that slight, completely offshoot tangent is that I don't really have a huge nostalgia component to this. So I wasn't hooked in by it from that aspect. And legacy games for me are sort of the sacred cow that I'm just not sure on a regular basis I would recommend a lot of people to get, because they're very group dynamic dependent with repeated plays necessary. So, if you have that, there are some absolutely fantastic experiences in those lines out there. But if you don't have that, and let me be clear, if you don't have it, if you don't lock it down and confirm it, you can fall flat on a lot of those games as well. So is this one any different? Again, let me know what you think down below if you have firsthand experience, because it's not like, I don't think it's a bad game. It's just, if it wasn't what you thought and what you wanted out of some of the other legacy games that you got, it might not be fitting your expectations. And I think maybe that endpoint is really what I'm trying to encapsulate here, is I think some of the stuff I read, reviewed, and heard it didn't meet what I thought it was going to be. So therefore, I don't think it's as good as I wanted it to be. And that's a lot of the stuff. I don't know. Maybe not. I'm probably wrong, as usual. Then, as a quick side note here, do you remember the Far Cry Beyond game that was all of a sudden announced and hyped by a couple channels, and then it didn't launch, and then it just completely failed, and we haven't heard from it hide nor hair since, right? That was awkward. That was super awkward, right? Okay. Now that we've gotten over that, and knowing that was only a year ago, somehow, right, we'll get past that. Now, next up, Tamashii Chronicles of Ascend from Awaken Realms. I owe them a little mea culpa. I'm way behind on that one. It is just like Matt Damon to Jimmy Kimmel, sitting somewhere on the side of the show, and will come out at the end if I have time. This is a bag building cyberpunk world-esque game with going up against AIs, maneuvering around on a hex-based grid system. It's actually a really good game, but I think it still has some of the usual shortcomings that we see with some of the other big crowdfunded games, where it's a little overproduced, there's a little too much content, and there's stuff just locked behind, scenarios or walls or things like that you have to slowly get through in order to actually get to it. And not that it's a bad thing, but it's, from an Awaken Realms light side of things, it's not light by any means. It's not. And so that's a little bit of a misnomer there, but you could make an argument. I may make an argument that it is, mechanically speaking, at its core, one of the best Awaken Realms games, period. From a core mechanical, what they're doing from those aspects. But all around, again, I'd also argue that it's probably the least well-known of any of the Awaken Realms games as a whole, right? That it's not gotten any notoriety or hype or praise or gloriousness that all of the other ones do. And it's kind of strange to me. Is it because it's under the light moniker? Is it because it's not on the main brand? It's a stepchild sort of thing? And I feel bad for it, because it deserves more attention than that, because it really is kind of good. Surprisingly good. But where is it? And again, just like when I talked about in the 2023 video, what ones all of a sudden fun gadzooks, like a Cryptic Nature, or one of those other nature-themed ones from earlier this year that just kind of came out of nowhere, and that you're kind of trail exploring and gets hundreds of thousands of dollars and whatever, right? And then ones like this that just don't. And that's kind of disappointing as well, because, and I kind of feel like at the same time, I just had this realization today, right? I'm an influencer. Ew, I feel dirty saying that. But what I mean in that sense is that that's the type of game that I need to influence in that way, as not a negative connotatorial sort of situation, right? To bring to light. I am great at bringing to light some of the issues, but let's also bring to light some of the surprises, right? Lacuna was a huge surprise for me. Gosu X was a huge surprise for me of 2023. Nekojima were a huge surprise for me of 2023. That is why I have this platform. Not just to shout it from the rooftops that I have the hype and the hotness, and that, I'm going to lord it over you as a big channel, and I get to talk about it before. No, because I don't. But that's why we do it. That's why I still do a crowdfunding weekly roundup, folks. It's not just because I do the big games and I like talking about the big games. I like seeing the small stuff that comes out. I like being surprised at the small stuff that really makes me go, whoa, right? Talked about it in the 2023 video. One of my favorite games of all time, Rumble Nation, Japanese import game. You've probably never heard of it unless you've heard me rant on it elsewhere on the channel in the first place. You know? And it was funny. Been ranting about it for years. A bunch of other folks, influencers, finally played it last year, end of last year. And they were like, whoa, this game is amazing. Like, yeah, shout it on the rooftops. That's why you should have your platform. That's what you should be doing on your platform, not just the ones that get sent to you all the time. And I'm guilty of that just as much as anyone else. I'm not throwing shade at anyone, right? Like, it's easier when they send me stuff because I feel like I need to. But at the same time, that's why I talk about the stuff that I trade for, that I still go out of my way to acquire because it's worthwhile. Rant over. So, side note there, as Tamashii somehow spiraled me into other things. But you know what? Truth be told, that's why you turn into this channel. I'm ineloquently eloquent. Boom. Dead by Daylight, level 99 games. Port IP video game over to the tabletop. Killers versus survivors. I don't know. I didn't have any interest in this, right? Like, I've espoused my views on horror and horror themed genres and horror themed movies elsewhere. You know, unless it's like this, which isn't really that, I don't really have a whole lot of inkling towards it. Like any of the other stuff, like Resident Evil, for example, I've never played those video games. I never had any interest in them. I have no interest in horror movies. Like, I've only seen the first Saw. I have no interest in any of the scary movie sort of crap, whatever. One of my, friends from work was a huge Jason, Halloween person. I have absolutely zero interest in that whatsoever. So this one was an easy pass. And they put out this super deluxe edition, which was the collector's edition, I believe, which actually the price point was pretty good. But the reviews on it are, well, you either kind of love it or you hate it right now. I went over to the Board Game Geek forums and it's kind of like 10s or 3s. So one versus all, right? And then that tends to be a very divisive mechanic. I talked about on the other video with the crowdfunding, you shouldn't back this, from earlier in the month, last month, that, with the Storm Raiders game from Shem Phillips, right? That arguably it's going to raise less money because pick up and deliver is a less popular mechanic overall. And I would argue very similarly, even as someone who loves one versus all, it's also a significantly less popular mechanic. It is. That's not my bias speaking. I think that's the general hobby more than anything else. And this tends to be just along that side of things. It's been delivered, it's been out there, but it's IP heavy, and I think mechanically speaking, I can't speak to it one way or the other. The only other thing I can see in the comments based on it is it's very player number dependent, right? Better at very certain player counts, the odd number player counts, the 3s and the 5s, because 1 versus 2 and 1 versus 4 really works better as a whole. Because sometimes with these 1 versus all dynamics, if you have to control multiple things or multiple people and you get spread too thin, or it just isn't as fun if you're having to do too much of this and not enough just down here, if you know what I mean, right? Like with dungeon crawls, if you need a 4-player count and you have to control 3 of them or 2 of them more than just the 1, like the 1 you can just really focus on in a KDM, Aeon Trespass Odyssey, right? And it's not that they're bad at 1, right? Like people grind those games out solo all the time. Yours truly with Aeon Trespass Odyssey, but it's not the same. It's not the same. And part of it is the dynamic, the play off of each other, the play with each other in that game. And so that's what I feel like this game could be very divisive of in that sense. And so maybe that's what people are thinking of more than anything else. But I mean, I was actually surprised to see it that low, even though, again, 7.3, it's not bad at all. Just clearly not for everybody. And is that because it's not as good overall? Taking that back a second. Or is it because you get people that are hooked in by the nostalgia, hooked in by the IP, hooked in by the, aesthetic, and then when they actually find out what the mechanics are, right? Ever been one of those? Yeah, you shouldn't be, because I talk about it all the time, and I give you rules synopsis, and I tell you to read the rule books, and I tell you to watch the playthroughs. But if you don't do that, you know what? That's on you then too. And so that's like Root. That's the classic Root example of people, whoa, that's really cute. That's really cool aesthetic. Oh, what do you mean this is a war game, Chris? Yeah, right? Okay, we're done. Encyclopedia. Talked about it in the channel. It's a very nice, again, animal, earth-based. It's not really earth-based. It's Darwin, but exploration-based dice worker mechanic. So, do you like dice worker placements? I think this one is a solid one. I was very pleased by it. It wasn't overwhelmingly awesome, but it was probably one of the better dice worker placement games I've played in the last couple years. And then the whole thing happened with Grail Games. And I'm not really sure how widely available it is at this point, because for a while, I think just for a very brief snapshot, it was going hotcakes in the secondary market because people thought they wouldn't be able to get a copy again. And then it like showed up at retail, like a little bit wider. And so I don't think the demand is right there. The deluxifications, I mean, we're fine. And so did you like the dynamics offering between the cards, the dice, and the, you know, different creatures, the different continents, the different ways of drafting, and the asymmetry in that sense? But to be honest with you, when I sit back and I think about it too, as someone who had a hands-on copy, and granted that was over a year ago for me, I don't also remember, you know, being wowed by any of the mechanisms. I can't speak to you off the top of my head because, again, transparency here, right? I didn't look up the specific mechanisms and the interactions to talk about it in this video. I do a lot of this by rote memory and feel, and I don't remember anything strongly mechanically, right? You've heard me say it before. Hot, cold, lukewarm in between, right? Lukewarm, you know? Again, not bad, but lukewarm, not strong enough opinion. And so if it's not a strong enough opinion, sometimes you just kind of also go, well, we'll see. We'll pass on it from that aspect of things. Oranienburger Kanal. I'm mispronouncing that. I know. I'm sorry. From Spielworks. This is probably their highest rated game from a Rosenberg as well, as in a multi-deck Agricola style play, if you will, where they came with several different add-on decks to sort of mix and match as you're playing these, building industries, infrastructure, pathways, streets, railways, canals, and everything of the ilk, connecting these buildings with the various actions. And I think actually, if I remember, more of, I don't think it was actually a rondel. You know what, I'm going to mess that up. But it was worker placement along those lines. And sort of looking a little bit lighter because the playtime is like between 40 and an hour-ish. But the weight of sitting at like nearly a 3.5 on Board Game Geek as well is sort of this dichotomous contrast that I looked at very heavily. I thought about late backing. I almost traded for it twice. And I just couldn't ultimately do it because it looked just a little too heavy for a card-driven 2-player game for me. Because my wife would not like this style of things. This would be too heavy for her. She is a lighter style gamer at heart. And I love it about her because she'll play all those things with me. This would have to be lighter for me to be able to get it from that side of things. But again, it has an 8 rating on Board Game Geek with more ratings than some of the other big campaigns we've talked about previously in this year's and the 2023's in terms of, you know, like 800 reviews, which is fantastic comparatively to how many copies were actually sold as well. And so from Spielworks' side of things, I think you have to be relatively pleased from that aspect, because the other thing that has to be noted there is that this is pretty much their highest rated game. And now let me clarify that, because they produce other games in other parts of the world, but as a, you know, solely produced, like this is what they did to crowdfunding and on GameFound, like I think this is their highest one overall, which is saying something. And it's a Rosenberg, so a lot of Rosenberg fans out there really like this one as well. Again, can't speak to the personal mechanics and the details of it, but it's definitely an indie game that's going to be harder to get. So if you have any interest in it, it's going for easily higher than what it did on crowdfunding on the retail side of things. So I guess, you know, if you really want something heavier, 2-player card driven with worker placement, maybe a shorter playtime, check it out. So let's go then over to another aspect of the slightly heavier within the genre, and that's Motor City from Motor City Games. And I have it sitting right up there on the shelf. And it's a little bit heavier of a roll and write. It is. It's not like super heavy. It's not Hadrian's Wall heavy, but it's a step up. It's not probably as heavy as Three Sisters. Three Sisters is a little bit, you know, this. And I didn't think I had any trouble understanding Motor City. And I was relatively impressed by it, actually. I got a little pre-production copy. They sent me a print and play version of it prior to the campaign, so I talked about it then. And it's just nice. It's just nice. You can see the pieces, you can understand how the pieces, but you have to optimize the pieces. And it's just a little bit of a step up from the average roll and writes in general. Is it doing anything, again, completely and utterly different? No. Does it need to, though? No. People always think like you have to be super innovative. You have to be doing super something different, right? Like look at a couple of the past years' top couple of games, right? Ark Nova Earth, right? Like they're not doing anything, you know, Dwellings of Elderville. They're not doing anything like super completely uniquely different, right? They're taking a mechanistic approach, smashing together stuff that is familiar, see Dune Imperium, and just doing it in a slight twist. Not necessarily like, ooh, I've never seen this done before, but wow, this is just a nice twist on it. And I really like that. And so sometimes you don't have to have a ton more. You can use it in a different way in that sense as well. So in that sense, I say that way too much. I know. So I'm sorry. So again, how do you feel about it now? Do you really want a copy of it? Again, how does it compare? Are you a really heavy roll and write person? And I mean that in the sense of, do you really enjoy them and have a lot of them overall, not in the sense that you need a heavy one? Because I feel like you could also, if you weren't as familiar with them, still not have a whole lot of trouble. It's not convoluted. It's easy to understand. And it's relatively straightforward in terms of explanation. And so that also can't be, well, discounted. And so I really like that from that aspect. You know, it does do something slightly different. So it's not completely uniquely innovative, but it is doing something in the, you know, you place a die and you're drafting a die from those areas instead of just a pure simple roll and write. So again, it does that twist on something clever that's slightly unique, but also slightly something familiar. And familiarity breeds happiness, not contempt, folks, right? Then let's go over to one from, I'm going to mispronounce this French publisher's name, but this is Malhya, Land of Legends. This one came out of nowhere for me. Now, I'm clearly, you know, not, you know, necessarily as familiar with it. It's more recently funded from the moon. This is from the company that did It's a Wonderful Kingdom, It's a Wonderful World, as well as Daimyo, Rebirth of the Empire. And so from a dungeon crawl, 1 to 5 player story-driven cooperative game, they did something different. And it gives me more of like Chronicles of Drunagor vibes, if you will. And all the biggest channels talked about it, had some hype from it. So it's just also, I looked at it and I said, what's different about it? What is the such unique mechanical difference comparatively? Because if you go to the Kickstarter page, right, the vibe is very, very similar. Right here, aesthetically, with the miniatures, with the sort of setup and the little bit of coloration, it looks very similar scheme-wise as well. And the problem is, well, with this one, unlike a lot of the others on this list, delivery was supposed to be July of 2023. Right, about that. But I mean, nowadays, this one also has all the tropes of the usual. I'm going to show you all the components, and you'll notice, if you can't see above my head right now, I am literally probably 2/3 of the way down the page, and at this point, you have not seen anything hide nor hair of how the gameplay starts until right here. And even then, it's a vague description. Little videos that lay things out individually. How do things flow? How are things different? It's a campaign game. Now, rulebook was out there, so you could take a look at that, but that's it. A couple reviews down here, a couple previews, whatever, right? Where are things at? And they give you, actually, on the latest update from the end of January here, at least the time of filming this, a very nice progress thing. And they said there was a big delay. There's actually 3 months since the previous update from this, so like October. So like people were a little nervous. They actually addressed it in the comment section here within the project, description. And they say, we are in the midst of doing things and we're looking for production, if I can find it here, April of 2024. There it is right there. If we're going to do that, then maybe worldwide shipping around September. So you may or may not get it by October. You're going to be lucky if everything goes right to get it before 2025. So that's a 1.5 years over. That's a long time, and that's the problem with some of these. Also, 1.2 million characters. It reminds me right now of the whole big thing with Dante's Inferno coming from CGS, right? Another one in the lines of these big, narrative-driven, choose-your-own ramifications, consequences. Where's Storm Sunder, by the way? I can't remember where that one's at either at this time, but that's another in those lines of things. Like, how many of those do you have? Do you have a type? You do, because you probably have 3 of these pending at this point if you're one of these people as a whole, because I guarantee you have more cash than sense of goodwill in that. And I'm talking to myself here as someone who literally just got ISS Vanguard and Mythic Battles Ragnarok all within like a week of each other and is still working through a couple others. So again, I'm pointing the finger at me just as much as I'm pointing at you, and there's everything you need to know. But again, is it going to be dramatically different? How different is it going to be? Is it going to be your poison compared to others? It did really well, $600,000, 5,000 backers, but I mean, right? Comparatively, until, hits the table, rubber meets the road, what's it actually going to look like comparatively, and is it going to beat stuff you already have or not? Nemesises, ISS Vanguards, your everything along the lines, right? Madara's Wave 2 and 3, all of this stuff is still forthcoming. I can't even think of all the ones that I've, not covered, but there's so many of this. And again, generic fantasy, you didn't see anything on the gameplay page there that made you, again, go, it's unique. At least you say that with a roll and write where you go, okay, it doesn't need to be unique. But if I have a dungeon crawl that is, 1 to 5 player cooperative, I have to have a certain number of players. It's going to be another 40 to 50 page rule book. It's going to take that much overhead space, time commitment, and effort to learn. How many of those can you do? At least with the roll and writes, again, like I can play 4 of those in a night and understand how to play all of them, teach how to play all of them, and play them all multiple times in the time it would take you to set up, tear down, and teach one scenario on this. So yeah, it's a little bit hypocritical for me to say this one needs to be more unique and those don't. At the same time, apples, oranges, apples, bananas, apples, kiwis, not the same thing. As much as I like, bananas and kiwis as a whole. So kiwis are a delicacy. My kids actually enjoy kiwis, surprisingly or not. Bananas are still the most eaten fruit in the household, though, by far. Most of them by me, though. Side tangent there. Another surprise of a year ago was one that I talked about on the channel. They did another campaign in 2023, Worldbreakers, the Advent of the Khanate, which is another different asymmetric faction-based pre-constructed deck building head-to-head game. Shut Up and Sit Down acclaimed it. They gave it a ton of attention. It sold out then, I think. And they sent me a copy right around the time that Shut Up and Sit Downs went out, and I talked about it too, and it's a great game. Now, comparatively for me, I'm probably looking back on it now and saying it wasn't one of my favorites, but let me be very clear on that too. Not my favorite does not equal not excellent either, because nowadays, I'm trying to separate out the mechanically I didn't like this, mechanically it is sound and I didn't like this, or it's really good and I like it. So you have these different categories on that aspect of things, and so mechanically it's doing stuff different, it's doing something clever, and I know why people will really, really like it. At the same time, I just didn't like it as much as comparatively to the other games I absolutely adore. But that's not also me negging on it, because it's still an incredibly solid game from an indie publisher, and so if you have any interest in it, it's fantastic to look from that side of things and always give them the support. But again, you got to know comparatively, and sometimes unfortunately the part of this is you have to try before you buy to figure out which one of these 1700 mage dueling head-to-head faction-based games are going to be right for you, because sometimes you'll have one that'll click and sometimes you won't, even though you think it is at the same time. So the tricky stance there as well. Then we had Earth Under Siege Flashpoint, which was sort of like a video game port coming over again to the tabletop, and sort of a stealth-based, scenario-driven crawl, if you will. Sort of a Metal Gear Solid set in space-ish situation, but it's probably one of the most difficult dungeon crawls I've played, and the rules were very, very, very detailed. So many rules, and so much overhead in this game as an evolving system of just depth. And they had to relaunch the campaign. The first time around it didn't succeed. The second time around it clearly did. So, again, it was supposed to be May 2023 for delivery date. And they finally just put out the rule book at the beginning of December here. And the production update actually only says that they're going over things getting uploaded to the printer at this point. So again, this is going to be very similar to Malhya, where you might be getting it sort of Q3 endish of that, Q4 beginning of 2024 if you're lucky and things go well, because another miniature based game. So yeah, that's kind of what you're looking at. And again, we'll see how it fares and how it holds up and how it is comparatively, right? Like, I just worry about scope creep with a lot of these games nowadays. Like, I was just looking at Dante's Inferno, the rulebook for that from CGS the night I'm filming this, and that is another 50-page rulebook, folks. And it's relatively intuitive. It's an easier read than a lot of them, but it's still 50 forking pages of upkeep. And they say, well, you can even do quick combat and skip over half the combat. And, you have the narrative card laying, story-driven overworld side of things too. But even that is, choose your own adventure KDM style-esque. So still 50 pages. That's a lot. And how many of those, again, can you have? I read stuff like that on a weekly basis for the crowdfunding roundup, but to be able to retain it and play it on a daily or monthly or weekly basis, depending on how many times your player group can get together repeatedly with the same core and the same game being played over and over again, yeah, you let me know in the comment section down below how that works out. And if you're one of those people, man, I give you props, you know, congrats, because I'm jealous. So that's it. 2022 in a nutshell. 2022. How many of those games are you still like, yes? How many of those games are you still kind of like, I didn't even know about those games, or I didn't even remember those games? Like, how many of those do you keep around in your mindset? And now, obviously, I'm familiar with them all. I covered them recently. I covered them now. I'm bringing them to light again. But, like, it's getting harder and harder to have the ones from crowdfunding nowadays that are really, really, really standing the test of time that you're loving. And it's becoming fewer and farther between. Even now, 2 years out. 2 years. What's going to happen when we get this to 5, folks? What's going to happen when we get this to 5? Are you going to have games that are more than 3 years old in your collection? How much of your collection will be that old at that point? Just food for thought, especially if you're not a collector. Especially if you're a collector, well, you know what, you're going to skew the bell curve. But just where my head goes sometimes with this stuff, especially at the end of the video. Anyway, next up, 2021. Whew. It's going to be interesting. Speaking of things not remembered and, well, whether or not they stand the test of time. Stay classy. Have a great day. And, you know, if you want to subscribe, that'd be awesome. But, you know, if you just want to hear me rant occasionally too, that's okay. Do you. Peace out. Not a negatory, not a negative connotory, as like, look at a couple of the past toppled games. Look at